The worst part wasn't even what my mother said. It was how normal she made it sound. She was standing by the dessert table at my younger brother's engagement party, smiling at people from church, balancing a paper plate with lemon bars on it, and she looked right at me and said, "Brielle is still figuring things out, but we're proud of her for trying." Trying. That was the word she used. Not working. Not building. Not surviving. Not succeeding. Trying. Then she gave this little laugh and added, "She's always been independent." Stubborn, really. We keep telling her she doesn't have to struggle just to prove a point. A couple people gave me that soft, polite look people give you when they think your life didn't quite come together. My dad was standing next to her in his navy blazer, nodding like she'd said something kind. My brother Grant didn't say anything. He just put his arm around his fiancée and looked away. And then my mother did the part that really got me. She reached into her purse, pulled out a folded set of keys, and pressed them into my hand in front of everybody. "They're for the Corolla," she said. "It's just sitting in the garage until you can get back on your feet." I stood there holding the keys to a 12-year-old car I did not need, while 8 people watched me like this was a sweet family moment. I remember the exact time because I looked at the microwave over the drink station. For 18 p.m. Sunday, May 4th, 2025. My brother's engagement party. My parents' backyard in South Park, Charlotte. 42 guests. White folding chairs. Catering from a place my mother loves because they put rosemary on everything. And me, standing there in a cream blouse and sling-back heels, holding car keys like a charity case. I handed them back and said, "You should keep it." She smiled tighter. "Honey, don't be proud." That was the moment I knew they still had no idea who I was. And the part they definitely didn't know? 3 weeks later, I was going to walk into a room where my whole family was already seated, hear my name called into a microphone, and watch every single one of them realize they had been talking down to the wrong daughter for years. But I need to back up, because if I start there, none of this will make sense. My name is Brielle Sutton. I'm 34 years old, and if you're watching this from somewhere far from North Carolina, I'd honestly love to know where. And subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by the exact people who should have known you best. Comment the word unseen if you know what that feels like. Because that was my place in my family for as long as I can remember. Not the difficult daughter. Not the dramatic one. Nothing that obvious. I was the daughter they could overlook without ever raising their voice. My younger brother Grant was the center of everything from the start. He fit the picture my parents liked. Confident, polished, easy in a room, the kind of kid adults called impressive at 14. He played varsity tennis, wore loafers in high school on purpose, got into Duke for pre-law, and never once made my parents feel embarrassed or confused when people asked what he was doing with his life. I was different. Not rebellious. Just not useful to their image. I liked working. Real working. I liked numbers, systems, fixing messy things behind the scenes. In high school, while Grant was at networking dinners with my dad's friends, I was selling custom invitation sets online and doing bookkeeping for my Aunt Renee's salon on weekends for $75 a month and free hair trims. I was 16 when I made my first invoice in Excel. I was 17 when I started helping one of Aunt Renee's friends clean up 6 months of late payroll records for her daycare center. I charged her $280. She paid me in 2 installments because that was all she could manage. I still remember how proud I felt depositing that check. My mother looked at the bank slip and said, "That's nice, Brielle. But don't let these little side hobbies distract you from finding a real path." That was the thing with my parents. They were never loud about me. They were just always gently framing me as temporary. Grant was the future. I was in a phase. Even when I was helping. Especially when I was helping. In my family, what I gave only counted if it came in a form they respected. When I was 19, my grandmother had knee replacement surgery in Colombia. My mother spent one afternoon at the hospital, took flowers, got photos, and went home because she had a charity board dinner that night. I stayed with my grandmother for 4 days in room 614, sleeping in a vinyl chair and helping her to the bathroom every few hours because the night nurse was short-staffed. When my grandmother got home, I sorted her pill schedule into one of those plastic organizers with the morning and evening slots. I labeled her physical therapy appointments on a calendar in thick black marker because her eyesight wasn't great. My mother told people, Brielle is such a sweet girl. She's always had a nurturing little streak. A nurturing little streak. Like I was baking cookies, not keeping the family together. Then there was college. Grant went to Duke. I went to UNC Charlotte because it was cheaper, and I got enough scholarship money to cover tuition after my Pell Grant and a local Women in Business award worth $2,500. I was relieved, actually. I didn't want student loans hanging over me. My dad called it settling. He said it one night over pot roast in October 2009. Grant had just gotten a 3.8 his first semester, and my dad was in one of his good moods, pouring sweet tea like we were in a commercial for a healthy family. He looked at me and said, "You've always been bright. I just don't want you getting comfortable with less." I remember saying, "Less debt sounds pretty good to me." He smiled at his plate. "That's exactly what I mean." That kind of thing happened all the time. Nothing big enough to point at. Nothing ugly enough for outsiders to call cruel. Just these little cuts that never looked like cuts unless you were the one living with them. I studied accounting for 2 years, then switched to operations management because I liked the way it worked better in real life. I liked seeing how money moved through actual businesses. I liked figuring out why things were broken. I graduated in May 2013 with no debt and $6,840 in savings from campus jobs, weekend client work, and one miserable tax season internship at a strip mall office where the printer jammed every day at 3 p.m. like it had a personal grudge against all of us. My parents barely talked about graduation. That same week, Grant had landed a summer internship at a law office in Raleigh, and that was all anybody wanted to hear about. At dinner, my mother toasted him with Prosecco and said, "This is just the beginning." Then she turned to me and said, "And Brielle, I know you'll find something that suits you." Something that suits you. I had already found something. They just didn't know how to see it. After college, I took an operations coordinator job at a regional furniture company in Charlotte. Starting salary was $41,500. It wasn't glamorous. Most days I was in spreadsheets, shipping logs, vendor disputes, and inventory adjustments. But I was good at it almost immediately. I could tell where a business was bleeding money by the second week. I could spot duplicate subscriptions, payroll errors, late fee patterns, broken invoicing systems, all of it. And while I was doing that job, I kept taking small clients on the side. A florist in Matthews, a mechanic in Gastonia, a 2-location pet grooming business in Huntersville, a woman who ran a mobile notary service and kept all her receipts in a cookie tin. I wasn't building some flashy startup back then. I was doing the kind of work people don't brag about at dinner parties. I was saving small business owners from drowning in their own paperwork. By 2016, I had 9 side clients and was making an extra $2,900 to $3,400 a month on top of my salary. I never told my parents the real number, partly because they never asked, partly because when I tried to talk about work, my mother's eyes glazed over after about 8 seconds unless the story involved a title she recognized. Attorney, doctor, developer, executive. Those were family words. Mine were things like process mapping and accounts receivable and vendor reconciliation. Might as well have been invisible. Then there was Nolan. That's where the family story really shifted. I met Nolan Price on August 18th, 2017 at 7:40 in the morning in the waiting area of a tire shop on South Boulevard. My rear tire had a nail in it. His company truck was in for brakes. He was drinking terrible coffee from a foam cup and reading a landscaping supply catalog like it was interesting. He worked in commercial irrigation. Not owned the company. Worked in it. Field supervisor. Long hours. Sunburned neck. Kind eyes. Quiet. The kind of man who listened all the way through before answering. He was 31. I was 26. Our first date cost $38.64 at a taco place in Plaza Midwood, and he texted me when he got home to say, "I had a really good time tonight. No game. No performance. No weird waiting 2 days. Just study." That was what I loved first. He was steady. My family did not love that. At first, they acted neutral. My mother asked what he did, and when I told her, she said, "Oh, outside work. He must be handy." My dad asked if he had plans to move up. Move up. Like earning an honest living under the sun was just a placeholder until he became someone worth mentioning. Grant was already in law school by then, and the comparison started almost immediately. It never sounded mean. That's what made it hard to explain. My mother would say things like, "Grant and Elise are such a good match. They understand each other's worlds." Or, "I'm sure Nolan is nice. It's just different, that's all." Different meant lower. That's what it always meant in my house. At Thanksgiving in 2018, Nolan came with me for the first time. He wore a charcoal sweater and brought a pecan pie from a bakery in Dilworth because he remembered my mother once saying she hated grocery store desserts. He said yes, ma'am, to my grandmother. He offered to carry chairs in from the garage. He complimented my dad's new patio heater. He did everything right. And somehow that made my parents colder, not warmer. Because it took away the excuse that he was rude or lazy or rough around the edges. They had to dislike him politely. I remember one exact moment from that day. We were in the kitchen around 2:15 p.m. My mother was slicing ham. Nolan had stepped outside to help my uncle with the smoker cover. Grant was talking about a clerkship he wanted after graduation, and my dad was eating deviled eggs straight off the tray. My mother leaned toward me and said, very softly, "A man like Nolan can be fine for now. I just hope you're thinking long term." I said, "What does that mean?" She kept slicing and said, "It means life is expensive, Brielle." Like I hadn't been paying my own rent since I was 22. Like I didn't know exactly what life cost. By then, my side work had grown enough that I was regularly making between $4,200 and $5,100 a month outside my full-time job. I had $28,000 in savings. I had no debt except my car payment, which had 11 months left on it. Nolan and I were splitting weekends between my apartment and his small rental house in Pineville, where the floors creaked and the water heater made a knocking sound every time somebody showered too long. I was not struggling. But once a family decides who you are, facts don't seem to matter much. In January 2019, my dad took Grant to Charleston for a father-son weekend after Grant made law review. 3 nights at the Harborview Inn. Steakhouse dinner. Golf on Saturday. Photos all over Facebook. That same month, I asked my dad if he could look over the lease terms on a tiny office space I was considering for my side business. Just 640 square feet over a shipping store on Fairview Road. Rent was $1,150 a month. I wanted a second set of eyes before I signed anything. He said, "Brielle, I really don't have time to get involved in hobby business stuff." Hobby business stuff. That office became important later. More important than he could have guessed. But at the time, I just nodded and said okay. That was how I survived my family for years. I stopped asking for the thing they weren't going to give. Attention. Respect. Curiosity. The basic effort of wanting to know me. The only person who really saw what was happening was my Aunt Renee. She wasn't my mother's favorite person because she'd been divorced twice, owned a salon with purple accent walls, and said things at the table nobody else was brave enough to say. She was also the only one who ever asked me real questions. Not, "How's work?" Real questions. "How many clients are you up to now? What are you charging? Are you sleeping enough? Do you want the bigger life you're building? Or are you just trying to prove your parents wrong?" That last one stayed with me. She asked me that in March 2019 while we were eating chicken salad sandwiches in the back room of her salon after close. The dryers were off. It smelled like bleach and hairspray and cucumber lotion. I told her I didn't know. She looked right at me and said, "Baby, make sure you're building a life you actually want. Revenge burns hot and fast. A real life has to carry you longer than that." I think about that now all the time. Because she was right. Back then, though, I was still trying to win something I was never going to get. Nolan proposed on September 14th, 2019 at Freedom Park. Nothing elaborate. No photographer hiding in the bushes. No violin. Just the two of us near the water after a long walk, with a small ring he'd saved for 6 months to buy. The ring cost $2,300. I know because he told me later when I asked if he'd gone into debt. He said no. I wanted to do this right. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. When I told my parents, my mother went very still. Then she smiled and said, "Well, that's sooner than I expected." My dad asked when the wedding would be. I said probably spring. He asked if Nolan was prepared for that. Prepared. Again, it was always the same thing. Not direct enough to call out in the moment. Just enough to leave a bruise. Then over the next few months, it got worse in that casual, polished way my family specialized in. Grant got engaged 3 weeks after making partner track at his firm, and suddenly every family dinner turned into planning around his future. Guest counts, venues, career trajectories, neighborhoods, tax brackets, honeymoon ideas. When my wedding came up, my mother would say, "Of course we want Brielle to be happy." That sentence always had a but in it, even when she didn't say it out loud. By February 2020, I was paying most of the deposits myself because my parents kept delaying any real commitment. The venue Nolan and I picked was a restored brick greenhouse in Belmont. Deposit was $1,800. Catering estimate for 68 people was $4,920. I covered both and told myself it was easier that way. Then one night my mother called and said, "Your father thinks a smaller ceremony might make more sense." I asked because. She paused long enough for me to know she was editing the truth. Because people talk, Brielle. They compare. Grant's wedding will be a larger event, and we don't want yours to feel mismatched. I sat on the edge of my bed with that sentence in my lap like something rotten. We don't want yours to feel mismatched. Not too expensive. Not too visible. Not too close in quality to the golden child's life. That was my lane. And I wish I could say that was the moment I stopped caring. It wasn't. I still kept showing up. Still brought side dishes to Easter. Still sent my dad a bottle of the bourbon he liked for Father's Day. Still mailed my mother flowers on her birthday. Still answered Grant's last-minute texts asking if I could help with things nobody else wanted to handle. I booked the hotel blocks for his engagement weekend because his fiancée was overwhelmed. I designed the seating chart template. I caught an error in the caterer contract that would have cost them $1,240 in extra staffing fees. I stayed up until 1:13 a.m. one Thursday reworking the rehearsal dinner budget in Google Sheets after Elise called me crying because her mother had invited 14 extra people. Nobody thanked me in a way that landed. They just trusted I'd handle the practical things. That was my role. Grant got celebrated. I got used. And all the while, quietly, off to the side, my real life kept growing. Not the family version of me. The actual one. The one nobody at my parents' table ever bothered to learn. By the time I married Nolan, there was already a whole part of my life they knew nothing about. And the truth is, that was partly my fault. I stopped telling them. I got tired of watching their eyes go flat. So I built in silence. And that silence would eventually put all of us in the same room for a moment none of them saw coming. But before that happened, my family found one more way to remind me exactly where they thought I belonged. And that part started with a dinner bill, a country club patio, and something my father said to Nolan with a smile on his face. A week after Nolan and I got married, my parents hosted a family dinner at the Carolina Country Club for Grant and Elise because they'd just closed on a townhome in Myers Park. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. Purchase price was $612,000. My dad repeated that number twice like it was part of the blessing over the meal. This was June 2020, and technically Nolan and I were invited too, but it felt more like we were there to round out the table. I remember the patio was crowded and hot. It had rained around 4 o'clock, so everything smelled like wet brick and cut grass. My mother had on a pale blue dress and pearl earrings. Grant was talking about cabinetry like he'd built the place himself. Elise kept showing everyone photos from the inspection report. Nolan was quiet. He always got quieter around my family. Not insecure, just careful. He'd learned by then that my parents didn't say insulting things directly. They said them with smiles while asking if you wanted more iced tea. The waiter came by and my dad ordered a bottle of wine without asking anybody what they wanted. Then he looked at Nolan and said, "You still with that irrigation company?" Nolan said, "Yeah, going on 9 years now." My dad nodded slowly. "Good. Stability matters." Then he cut his steak and added, "Though I imagine Brielle's the one with the head for numbers." There it was. That little polished dig. Not that Nolan was failing, just that he was limited, manageable. A man who should be grateful my kind of daughter chose him. No one smiled and said, "She's definitely smarter than I am." My father laughed too hard at that. I didn't, because by then Nolan had spent the last 4 months helping me build something none of them knew existed. Back in January 2020, I'd leased that tiny office on Fairview Road anyway. The one my dad called hobby business stuff. The paint was a bad beige. The carpet had a coffee stain near the baseboard heater. The sign on the downstairs door still had the old tenant's name half peeled off. But it had one window, a locking file closet, and rent I could cover without panicking. That office became the first real home of Sutton Ledger. That was the name I picked for the business. Not consulting. Not advisory group. Nothing polished and vague. Sutton Ledger. Because I knew exactly what I did. I cleaned up business messes and made the numbers tell the truth. At first, it was me and a used desk I got off Facebook Marketplace for $90, a printer from Staples, and Nolan hanging blinds on a Saturday because the afternoon sun hit the monitor so hard I couldn't see half my screen after 2:30. I still had my full-time job then, so I worked mornings, evenings, and weekends. Up at 5:20. Coffee by 5:35. Client files open by 5:45. Office job from 8:30 to 5 o'clock. Back to Sutton Ledger by 6:15 if I wasn't meeting a client. It was exhausting, but it was clean work. Honest work. The kind that adds up. By September 2020, I had 12 monthly retainer clients. A pediatric dentist in Matthews. A family-owned roofing company in Concord. A woman who ran 2 dance studios and hadn't paid herself consistently in 11 months because she didn't know where her cash flow was going. A bakery in Monroe losing almost $1,800 a month to waste and underpriced catering trays. I wasn't just doing books. I was fixing operations. Late invoices. Sloppy vendor contracts. Payroll leakage. Bad scheduling. Pricing that made no sense. I'd walk into a business and within 2 weeks I could usually find what was keeping the owner up at night, even if they couldn't name it yet. And the thing my parents never understood was that this kind of work mattered. Not in a flashy way, not in a family bragging way, but real people were sleeping better because of it. By December 2020, Sutton Ledger brought in $84,300 total revenue for the year. That was side income, not my salary. Side income. I told nobody in my family. Aunt Renee knew. Nolan knew. My tax preparer knew. That was about it. And that silence wasn't just about privacy anymore. It had become a kind of protection. Because every time I let my parents near something I cared about, they found a way to make it smaller. So I stopped offering it up. Meanwhile, the family story about me stayed exactly the same. Brielle was still figuring things out. Brielle was practical. Brielle was good with little businesses. Brielle and Nolan were making it work. Making it work. That phrase came up so often I started hearing it before they even said it. At Christmas 2020, my mother handed Grant and Elise an envelope with a $10,000 check for house updates. She gave Nolan and me a stand mixer in silver and said, "For all those cozy meals at home." I actually laughed when I opened it because it was so on the nose. Not cruel enough to complain about, just clear enough to sting. Later that night, when we got back to Nolan's place, he carried the mixer in and set it on the counter and said, "You know we make more than Grant and Elise do together, right?" I said, "I know." He said, "Then why do they talk to us like we need coupons and prayer?" I sat on the edge of the sofa and said the quiet part out loud. Because they don't respect work they can't show off. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "That's their loss, Brie." It was. But it still hurt. In March 2021, everything changed financially for me. I left my full-time job. I gave notice on March 15th. Last day was April 2nd. I had 15 retainer clients, $41,200 in business savings, and 6 months of personal expenses set aside. I ran the numbers 12 times before I did it. I still remember signing the resignation letter. My hand shook a little, not because I thought I'd fail, because I knew that once I made that move, I was fully on my own. No family safety net. No just in case rescue. No parent I could call if it went sideways. I'd stopped expecting that years before, but putting in writing makes things real. That night, Nolan brought home takeout from this type place I like on East Boulevard and said, "So now what?" I said, "Now I see how big this can get." And it got big faster than either of us expected. In the first 6 months after I went full-time, I added 8 new clients just from referrals. One was a custom cabinet shop doing about $1.2 million a year in revenue, but somehow still operating like everything lived in somebody's glove compartment. One was a boutique commercial cleaning company with 23 employees and no real payroll controls. One was a wellness clinic whose owner thought she was losing money because of insurance reimbursements. But the actual problem was 3 years of terrible vendor contracts and duplicate software subscriptions, bleeding out $3,700 a month. By January 2022, Sutton Ledger crossed $210,000 in annual revenue. I hired my first part-time employee that February. Her name was Tasha. She was 29, sharp as a tack, had 2 kids, and could untangle a backlog of receipts faster than anybody I've ever met. I paid her $28 an hour to start and raised it to $31 by fall because she earned it. When I told my mother I'd brought on help, she said, "Oh, that's nice. An assistant can make all the difference." An assistant. I didn't correct her. Tasha wasn't my assistant. She managed 3 client accounts and caught mistakes I would have missed on tired days. But there was no point explaining. My mother only had 2 categories for women's work: cute little business, real career. Mine never seemed to cross over in her mind. Then Grant got engaged. That's when the disrespect got more organized. Not louder. More organized. Elise came from a family exactly like mine, just with better jewelry and softer voices. Once those 2 families fused, everything became even more about appearances. There were dinner reservations made 6 weeks in advance. Linen choices discussed like treaty terms. Engagement photos shot at a private garden because public parks had too much unpredictability. And somehow, in the middle of all that, I became useful again. Not important. Useful. Because I was dependable. Because I knew how to manage logistics. Because I fixed messes. Elise texted me on September 8th, 2022, at 10:47 p.m. asking if I could help compare vendor proposals because you're so good at practical stuff. Practical stuff. I built a full wedding budget tracker for her the next day because I was trying to be a good sister-in-law and maybe, if I'm honest, because some part of me still wanted to be appreciated. The spreadsheet had 11 tabs. Venue. Florals. Guest list. Alterations. Transportation. Catering. Contingency. All of it. It saved them money too. I caught duplicate rentals and a markup issue in the rehearsal invoice that would have cost an extra $2,160. Elise thanked me by sending a heart emoji and later introducing me to one of her friends as the organized one in the family. The organized one. Grant was the brilliant one. I was the organized one. I don't think people realize how much damage gets done by being reduced for years into some cheerful little supporting role. Especially when you're accomplishing things they'd be bragging about nonstop if the right child had done them. Because while all this was happening, my business kept climbing. By mid-2022, Sutton Ledger had 26 monthly clients. Monthly recurring revenue averaged $24,600. Quarterly project work added another $18,000 to $30,000 depending on the season. I moved into a better office in South End in August 2022. 1,140 square feet. Exposed brick. Conference room with glass panels. Rent was $3,480 a month, and I signed that lease without asking my dad to glance at a single line. By then, Nolan and I had also bought our house. Not huge. Not flashy. Ours. Closed November 17, 2022. Brick Ranch in Madison Park. Purchase price $438,000. 3 bedrooms. One ugly bathroom we plan to redo later. A giant oak tree in the front yard. And a detached garage Nolan loved immediately because he said it had possibilities, which turned out to mean shelves, tools, and eventually a smoker big enough to intimidate the neighbors. We put 15% down. No help from my parents. No gift. No loan. Nothing. My mother's response when she came by for exactly 42 minutes one Sunday afternoon? It's sweet. A good starter home. Starter home. I had just wired more money at closing than she'd ever seen me hold in one place, and she was still talking to me like I was in some delayed launch phase of adulthood. Then she asked if we planned to upgrade eventually. I said, we just got here. She smiled and said, of course. I only mean once things are more settled. More settled. There was always some invisible future point where I would finally become valid to them. And somehow I was always standing just short of it. The only person who reacted normally to my actual life was Aunt Renee. When I showed her the new office, she stood in the doorway, looked around the conference room, the built-in shelves, the framed service menu, the glass jar of peppermints on the front desk, and said, well, look at you. This isn't a little business. This is a machine. Then she hugged me so hard my earrings dug into my cheek and whispered, don't shrink this for anybody. I almost cried right there beside the copier. By spring 2023, I had 3 employees. Tasha full-time. Miguel handling data cleanup and reporting. A client coordinator named Leah who could schedule a 6-week rollout without losing her mind. That year, we crossed $480,000 in revenue. I paid myself $132,000. The business still retained enough cash to keep growing. I started speaking at small business workshops through the Charlotte Women's Enterprise Network, mostly boring 8 a.m. sessions on cash flow, process discipline, and why I'll deal with it later is how companies end up gasping for air. I loved those rooms. Not because they were glamorous. Because people listened. Business owners would come up after and say things like, you just explained something my CPA never explained, or I thought I was bad at this, but actually I just had no system. Those things mattered to me more than I can explain. Because I wasn't invisible there. People saw the value right away. At family dinners, though, it was like none of it existed. Grant made junior partner in 2023, and my parents hosted 24 people for champagne and catered appetizers. That same month, Sutton Ledger signed its largest client yet, a 7-location pediatric therapy group with annual billings just under $6 million. I told my parents at Sunday dinner because I don't know, maybe I was tired of hiding. My dad nodded and said, good for you. Then he turned to Grant and asked about billable hour targets. That was it. Good for you. Not what kind of client. Not how did you get them. Not how many people work for you now. Good for you. Nolan squeezed my knee under the table. He knew. He always knew exactly when something landed badly even if nobody else in the room noticed. And that was another thing my family never understood about him. They thought because he wasn't polished, he wasn't perceptive. Because he wasn't loud, he wasn't strong. Because he didn't perform success in the way they liked, he must not have much to offer. Meanwhile, this man was waking up on Saturdays to fix my office shelving, bringing dinner to my team during quarter-end pushes, reviewing security camera quotes for our new suite, and reminding me to eat something other than almonds when I got buried in work. He was not decorative. He was foundational. And my parents still treated him like a temporary compromise. By early 2024, it had gotten almost absurd. Sutton Ledger had 41 active clients, 5 employees. A waitlist. Revenue just over $760,000 that year. I bought a secondhand white Mercedes SUV in cash in June 2024 after driving my old Accord for 11 years. I didn't post about it. I just parked it in my own driveway and went on with my day. When my mother saw it for the first time, she said, "Oh, is this leased?" I said, "No." She looked surprised for half a second. Then she said, "Well, that's a big step. A big step." I could have laughed. At that point, the business account had more than my parents probably assumed I'd make in 5 years. But in their minds, I was still the daughter who needed the old Corolla and gentle concern. And yet, somehow, they still felt comfortable asking things of me. That was the part that finally started changing me. Not one big betrayal, just the constant pattern. Dismiss me, use me, minimize me, then call when you need something steady, organized, and invisible. And I wish I could say I stopped saying yes earlier than I did. But family habits run deep. I kept helping, right up until the thing happened that made it impossible to keep pretending I was fine with any of it. Because there's only so many times you can sit at a table where people treat your real life like a side note before something in you goes quiet. Not explosive. Quiet. And once I got quiet, I started noticing things more clearly. Who got introduced with pride? Who got explained away? Who got called when money or logistics were involved? Who got celebrated for polish while someone else carried the actual weight? That quiet changed everything. And it led straight to the dinner I mentioned before. The country club patio. The expensive wine. My father smiling across the table at Nolan. Because later that same night, after everybody else had dessert and coffee and one more round of family talk about Grant's bright future, my dad said something so casual and so revealing that I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and made a decision that started the whole chain of events. And once I made it, there was no going back. After dinner, the women drifted toward the patio heaters and the men stayed at the table with their coffee, like they always did. I was standing near the railing with Aunt Renee, half listening to Elise's mother talk about place cards, when I heard my dad laugh. It wasn't loud, but I knew that laugh. It was the one he used when he was saying something he thought was clever. I turned just enough to catch the end of it. He was looking straight at Nolan. And he said, well, if Brielle's little office thing ever slows down, I'm sure she can always help you with estimates from the passenger seat. There were maybe 6 people close enough to hear. My father, my mother, Grant, Elise, one of my dad's friends from the club, Nolan. Nobody said anything right away, because that's how these moments work in families like mine. Everyone feels it. Nobody reaches for it. Nolan gave a polite smile, the kind you give when you've already decided you're not going to hand someone the fight they want. He said, she's doing just fine. My father lifted his cup and said, I'm sure she keeps busy. Keeps busy. That was the phrase. Not builds companies. Not employs people. Not runs a business with real revenue, real clients, real payroll. Keeps busy. I still remember what I did. Nothing. I stood there with one hand wrapped around a sweating glass of club soda and said nothing. I didn't defend myself. I didn't call him out. I didn't make it awkward. I let the moment pass because that's what I'd trained myself to do for years. We got in the car at 9:12 p.m. Nolan started the engine, pulled out onto Sharon Road, and drove 2 full lights in silence before he said, very calmly, I'm done going over there. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just done. I stared out the window and said, I know. He kept his eyes on the road. It's not about me, Brie. I can take a stupid comment, but I'm not going to keep sitting in rooms where people talk about your life like it's imaginary. That sentence went straight through me, because that was it. That was exactly it. My life was imaginary to them unless it fit their script. I got home, took off my shoes, changed into an old t-shirt, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and all the lights off except the one over the stove. It was 10:06 p.m. I know because I opened a new spreadsheet and timestamped the first tab. That spreadsheet ended up being called Family Pattern. Not because I was trying to be dramatic. Because I needed facts. Cold ones. Dates. Comments. Money. Who got what? Who asked for what? What I contributed. What got ignored. I made columns. Date. Event. What was said. What I did. What they assumed. What was actually true. Once I started filling it in, I couldn't really stop. December 2020. Grant and Elise got $10,000 for house updates. Nolan and I got a stand mixer. September 2022. I built the wedding budget tracker. Saved them over $2,000. Was called the organized one. November 2022. We bought a house with no help. Mother called it a starter home. March 2023. Signed our largest client. Father said, good for you, then changed the subject. June 2024. Bought my SUV in cash. Mother asked if it was leased. May 2025. Brother's engagement party. Offered old Corolla until I got back on my feet. When I finished the first pass, it was 12:18 a.m. And there, in plain rows, was my whole family dynamic. Not one dramatic explosion. Just years of dismissal that looked small until you stacked it. That was the night I stopped hoping they'd wake up on their own. The next morning, I made two decisions. The first was personal. No more helping with Grant and Elise's wedding. No spreadsheets. No hotel calls. No budget rescue. No last-minute problem solving because I'm so good at practical things. The second decision was professional. I was going to stop hiding. Not by posting fake boss quotes online or suddenly becoming one of those people who turns every breakfast into a branding opportunity. I just wasn't going to minimize my life anymore to make my family comfortable. And weirdly, once I decided that, things moved fast. 2 days later, on June 11th, 2025, I had a breakfast meeting at 8 a.m. with a woman named Denise Holloway from the Charlotte Independent Business Alliance. One of my workshop attendees had introduced us a month earlier. Denise ran programming for their annual Small Business Summit, and she wanted to talk about me leading a panel that fall on sustainable growth for service-based companies. We met at a place in Dilworth where the coffee was good and the chairs were too low. I wore a navy blazer and brought a clean one-page overview of Sutton Ledger because I'm that person. Halfway through the meeting, Denise looked down at my revenue breakdown, then back at me and said, "You know you're bigger than a panel slot, right?" I laughed because I thought she was being nice. She wasn't. She said, "I'm serious. We've been tracking women-owned firms for our September awards dinner. Your company is on the shortlist for the Growth and Impact Award." I actually said, "I think you might have the wrong person." She smiled and tapped the paper. "Brielle, you went from solo consulting to a 6-person firm with retention over 90%, real payroll growth, and measurable client outcomes in under 5 years. That's not a hobby business. That's a stand-up company." I wanted to bottle that moment and pour it over every family dinner I'd ever survived. Not because I needed an award, because someone saw me correctly. We talked for another 40 minutes. The summit was scheduled for September 26, 2025, at the Mint Museum Uptown. About 220 attendees. Business owners, lenders, local press, sponsors, city people. The kind of event my parents would absolutely respect if they knew enough about it. Denise said the finalists would be notified in August and asked whether I'd be willing to attend even if I didn't win. I said yes before she finished asking. When I got back to the office, I told Tasha first. She screamed. Miguel slapped the desk. Leah said, "Wait, does this mean I need a better dress?" Nolan texted back 3 words when I told him. About damn time. That should have been the whole story right there. Quiet success, respected publicly, nice little ending. But family never lets things stay clean. Because once I started pulling back from being useful, my family noticed. Not my feelings. Not my exhaustion. My reduced availability. Elise texted me on June 16th asking if I could just quickly review revised floral members. I replied, "I can't this week." She wrote back, "No worries. Maybe later?" I said, "I'm stepping back from wedding planning stuff for a while." 10 minutes later, Grant called. Not to ask why. Not to ask if everything was okay. He said, "Elise is stressed. Couldn't you have waited until after the wedding?" That told me everything I needed to know. I said, "I've been helping for almost 3 years." He said, "And we appreciate it." He said it the way people say thank you to someone who dropped off napkins. I asked, "Do you?" There was a pause on the line. Then he gave me the version of himself my parents love most. Calm. Reasonable. Slightly superior. "Brielle, not everything is an insult. Mom and Dad worry about you because your life is less predictable than ours. That's all. Less predictable than ours." I looked around my office while he said that. A signed lease. Payroll calendar on the wall. Quarterly targets. Tasha in the conference room onboarding a new client. Invoices scheduled to go out the next morning. A business line that rang often enough to irritate me by noon most days. My life was not unpredictable. It just didn't come with cufflinks and a club membership. I said, "You really don't know anything about my life, do you?" He exhaled hard. See, this is what I mean. You're making it into something. And there it was again. The family magic trick. They reduce you. You react. Now you're the problem. I ended the call after 3 minutes and 21 seconds. Then I sat there staring at my desk until Nolan texted asking if I wanted sushi or tacos for dinner, and that small, normal question almost made me cry. Because my real life was so solid. That was the crazy part. It was my family that kept trying to turn it into a cautionary tale. Over the next month, I pulled back more. Skipped 2 Sunday dinners. Declined a group lake day. Didn't answer my mother's text asking if I wanted a few old serving pieces since I was probably still piecing your entertaining things together. Probably still piecing your entertaining things together. I had hosted 12 people at my house the week before on stoneware I bought myself and platters from a local ceramic shop, but sure. Then came the rehearsal dinner issue. This was the triggering moment, even if it didn't look like much from the outside. Grant and Elise's rehearsal dinner was scheduled for August 14th, 2025, at a private room in a steakhouse uptown. 71 guests. I only know that because Elise had texted the final count to the family group chat. On July 29th, my mother called at 6:42 p.m. I was in the grocery store comparing prices on olive oil because I am, apparently, exactly as thrilling as I sound. She said, "Honey, quick question. We're finalizing speeches for the rehearsal dinner." I said okay. She said, "We thought it might be best if Grant's college roommate gives the toast instead of you." I just stood there holding a bottle of olive oil like I'd forgotten what stores were for. I said I wasn't aware I was giving a toast. She gave a small laugh. "Well, you were one option. But with everything, we thought it should be someone whose path aligns more naturally with Grant's adult life." I said nothing. She kept going, trying to make it softer, which only made it worse. You know, someone who understands his world, his profession, his peers, his world. Like I was his childhood dentist or an old camp friend who'd faded out. I said, "I'm his sister." She said, "Of course. Don't make this ugly." That line, "Don't make this ugly." As if naming something is uglier than doing it. I put the olive oil back on the shelf and left my cart right there by aisle 6. I walked out of the store, got in my car, and sat with both hands on the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't call Nolan. I didn't call Aunt Renee. I just got very, very still. Because it finally hit me that there was no future version of me that would be enough for them. Not if I doubled revenue. Not if I bought a bigger house. Not if I won something. Not if I bent myself into a more acceptable shape. They had already decided who mattered in the family story. Grant was the one they presented. I was the one they explained. And once I understood that all the way down, a lot of things got simple. That night, I sent exactly 3 texts. One to Elise. "I won't be attending the rehearsal dinner. I hope the evening goes smoothly." One to Grant. "I love you, but I'm done volunteering for a role in this family that requires me to disappear." And one to Aunt Renee. "Can you come over tomorrow night?" She came with Thai food and a bottle of sparkling water and sat cross-legged on my sofa while I told her everything. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she said, "Okay." Just that. Then she asked, "What do you want now?" Not what would teach them a lesson. "What do you want?" I said, "I want to stop feeling ambushed by people who only value me when I'm useful." She nodded. "Good. That's clear." Then she said the thing I still hear in my head. "Stop auditioning for a part they already cast." I leaned back against the couch and laughed once, short and tired, because she was right and I hated that she was right. We talked until almost midnight. About boundaries. About money. About how often women in families get turned into support staff, while the golden child gets treated like the main event. About how my parents' favorite version of me was competent enough to help and dim enough not to threaten the hierarchy. Then Aunt Renee said, "By the way, when is that awards dinner?" I looked at her. "How do you know about that?" She rolled her eyes. "Because Tasha follows the salon page and told Marisol, and Marisol told me." "Don't change the subject." I told her the date. September 26th. She smiled slow. "You should go looking exactly like the owner you are." In August, the finalist email came. August 12th, 2025. 9:14 a.m. Subject line, Congratulations, Sutton Ledger has been selected as a finalist. I read it 3 times before it felt real. There were 4 finalists in the growth and impact category. We'd all be featured in the printed program. Each finalist would have a short profile on screen before the winner was announced. I forwarded it to Nolan, to Aunt Renee, to my team. I did not send it to my parents. That was intentional, because for once, I didn't want them adjusting themselves in advance. I didn't want a sudden burst of interest. I didn't want my mother saying, "Why didn't you tell us?" I didn't want my father pretending he'd always known I was doing well. I didn't want Grant asking if there was a table assignment. I wanted one thing: for them to sit in a room and see me before they had time to rewrite the story. I didn't know yet how that part would happen. At that point, I wasn't even sure any of them would be there. Then, 3 days later, the setup arrived on its own. My mother called and said she had one small favor to ask. That phrase alone should have warned me. The favor turned out to be a last-minute need for 2 extra tickets to a business event downtown in September because my father had promised to attend on behalf of one of his clients, and the guest list was apparently hard to get into. I asked what event. There was a pause. Then she said, something with local companies. At the Mint. I think there are awards involved. I nearly laughed. I said, very evenly, I might know someone. And that was the moment the whole thing locked into place. They still had no idea what I'd built. No idea why that room mattered. No idea whose name was printed in the program. They just wanted seats. And I was going to make sure they got them. When my mother asked about the tickets, I was sitting in my office with Leah reviewing fourth-quarter onboarding dates. I kept my face completely neutral and said, I can probably help with that. She sounded relieved right away. Oh, good. Your father committed before checking with anyone, and apparently this one is more buttoned up than we realized. More buttoned up. I almost smiled. I said, how many do you need? 4, if possible. Your father, me, Grant, and Elise. Of course. I told her I'd look into it and call her back. The second I hung up, Leah said, why do you look like that? I said, because God has a sense of humor. Then I told her, not everything, just enough. The event was the Charlotte Independent Business Alliance Annual Summit and Awards Dinner, September 26, 2025, at the Mint Museum Uptown. Cocktail hour at 6 o'clock. Dinner at 7 o'clock. Awards at 8:10. I already had a finalist packet sitting in my inbox. Already had my name in the printed program. Already knew there would be a 90-second profile video on each finalist before the category announcement. And now my family wanted 4 seats in the audience. Not because of me. Because my father wanted to be seen there. That part mattered. Because it meant what happened next wasn't something I staged to humiliate them. I didn't trick them into showing up for my moment. They chose the room themselves. They just didn't bother to ask enough questions before walking into it. I called Denise that afternoon. I said, this is going to sound strange, but I need 4 tickets under the Price family name. She didn't even pause. Done, she said. Then she laughed. Should I ask? I said, you probably shouldn't. She said, understood. When I called my mother back, I kept it simple. I got the tickets. Oh, Brielle, thank you. That's such a help. Help. Always help. I said, they'll be at will call under Nolan Price. There was a tiny pause there, just long enough. Then she said, perfect. No question about why. No curiosity. No, how did you get them? Just acceptance that somehow I had managed the practical thing again. A few days later, I got the event rundown. Finalists were asked to arrive by 5:15 for photos and a short media reception. Business attire. 1 guest seat reserved at our table, though finalists were encouraged to mingle before dinner. I asked Aunt Renee to come with me. Not because Nolan didn't want to. He did. He was proud of me. But 2 things were true at once. First, Nolan had spent years absorbing little cuts from my family just by being near me, and I knew the room was going to be charged enough already. Second, Aunt Renee had been there for the whole hidden version of my life. The spreadsheets. The doubt. The nights I almost made myself smaller again. The days I questioned whether any of it counted because the wrong people weren't impressed. She deserved to sit there. Nolan was more than fine with it. Actually, he was the one who said, "Take Renee. She's earned that front row reaction." That made me laugh for the first time all day. He helped me pick the dress, though. Not in some movie way. He just sat on the edge of the bed while I held up two options and said, "The navy one says exactly who you are. The green one says you'd like a martini first." I wore the navy. Simple. Clean lines. Nothing flashy. Exactly the kind of dress a woman wears when she doesn't need to prove she belongs in the room. The week of the event, my family barely mentioned it. My mother texted Wednesday asking what parking was like uptown. My father sent a group message about traffic near Tryon. Grant asked whether jackets were required. That was it. Not one of them had looked closely enough to realize why I had access. Not one of them had connected Sutton Ledger to me being in that room in any meaningful way. And part of me was still amazed by that. How do people know you for 34 years and still not know the shape of your life? Friday, September 26th, came warm and clear. I left the office at 3:40 so I could go home, shower, and get ready without rushing. Nolan came in from the garage while I was doing my makeup and leaned on the bathroom door frame. "You nervous?" "A little." "You should be. You built something real." I looked at him in the mirror and said, "That was either very sweet or very unhelpful." He smiled. "Both." Before I left, he handed me a small white envelope. Inside was a note in his blocky handwriting. "No matter what happens tonight, nobody in that room gets to decide what your life is worth. They're just catching up." I still have that note. Aunt Renee and I got to the Mint at 5:11 p.m. The lobby was already filling with people in dark suits and cocktail dresses, name tags, sponsor banners, the usual low hum of event voices. Staff were setting out wine glasses. Someone from a local bank was taking photos near the step and repeat. My finalist badge had a gold stripe on it. That was when it first started to feel real. Not in theory. Not in email. Real. I checked in. Denise hugged me. The photographer took 3 shots by the wall with the event logo. I met the other finalists, all of them impressive in different ways. A woman who ran a growing logistics firm. A husband and wife team with a specialty food company. A guy who'd turned a neighborhood bike shop into 3 locations and a repair training program for teens. Good company. Real company. At 5:42, I saw my family arrive through the lobby glass. My father first, of course. Dark suit. Silver tie. That same posture he always has in public, like he's slightly taller than the room. My mother right behind him in a soft gold dress. Grant and Elise together. Elise had one of those tiny crystal clutches that looks like it can hold exactly 1 lipstick and a grudge. I was standing off to the left near a sponsor display when they checked in. I watched the woman at will call smile and say, "Yes, I have 4 under price." I watched my mother's face do the tiniest flicker at Nolan's last name. Still, none of them got it. They took their badges. They stepped into the room. They looked around like they belonged there. I turned away before they could see me. Not because I was hiding. Because I wanted the reveal to happen where there was no sidestepping it. Inside the dinner hall, the tables were set with black linens, white plates, low arrangements of greenery and white flowers, and little place cards in heavy cardstock. My finalist table was near the front, just off center from the stage. My family's table was 3 rows back on the left. Close enough to see clearly. Far enough that they weren't part of my evening unless I chose to make them part of it. Aunt Renee saw them before I said anything. She leaned in and whispered, "Oh, this is going to be better than cable." I almost choked on my water. At 6:18, my mother finally spotted me. I know the exact time because the giant screen was showing sponsor slides, and I looked up right as she froze. Her eyes went first to my dress, then my badge, then the table where I was seated. Not in the audience. Not helping at registration. Not somebody's +1. At the front. A finalist. She touched my father's arm and said something. He turned. Saw me. His whole face changed in that slow, controlled way I knew so well. Not shock first. Calculation first. He said something to Grant. Grant looked. Then Elise. Even from 3 rows back, I could read the confusion. I gave a small nod. Nothing else. Aunt Renee sipped her sparkling water and said, "Keep your shoulders down. Let them work for it." Dinner started at 7:06. Salad first. Then short remarks from sponsors. Then a keynote from a woman who founded a manufacturing firm in Gaston County and talked about surviving her first 3 payroll crises without losing her mind. I barely tasted any of the chicken. My phone buzzed once under the table. From my mother. Why are you at the front? I locked the screen and put it back in my bag. At 8:12, the awards portion began. The MC was a local news anchor with that polished, cheerful tone people use when they know they're running exactly 7 minutes behind schedule. She started with 2 other categories: community leadership, innovation in workforce development. Then she said, our next award recognizes a company that has shown not just strong growth, but measurable impact in the businesses and people it serves. My hands went cold. Aunt Renee reached under the table and squeezed my fingers once. The finalist videos started. Each company got 90 seconds. The bike shop first, then the specialty food company, then the logistics firm. Then my screen filled the room. Not literally mine, but mine. Sutton Ledger's logo came up in white against navy. Then photos. Our office in South End. Tasha in the conference room. Miguel at the data wall. Leah on a client call. A shot of me at a workshop with a screen behind me that read cash flow is a system, not a guess. A client testimonial about how we'd helped a business go from 2 late payroll cycles in 1 quarter to 18 straight months of clean books and stable cash reserves. On-screen text, founded in 2020. Grown from solo practice to 6-person firm. 87 active clients. 2024 revenue, $760,000. 2025 projected revenue, $1.1 million. Specializing in operational finance for small and mid-sized service businesses. Then the voiceover said my name. Not Brielle is trying. Not Brielle keeps busy. Not Brielle has a little office thing. It said, founder and CEO Brielle Sutton built Sutton Ledger to help growing companies tell the truth about how they run, earn, and survive. Founder and CEO. On the giant screen. Into a microphone. In a room full of people my parents respected. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't need to. I could feel the hit of it landing 3 rows back. The video ended on a shot of my team standing in the office lobby, smiling like the absolute pros they were. The applause started. Not polite family applause. Real applause. I finally looked back. My mother had both hands pressed flat to the tablecloth. My father was sitting very still. Grant looked like someone had removed a step from a staircase he thought he knew by memory. Elise was staring at the program in her lap, probably reading all the things she hadn't known enough to ask me. Then the MC opened the envelope. And this year's Growth and Impact Award goes to Sutton Ledger. I heard Aunt Renee say, very softly, there it is. For 1 second, everything around me went quiet. Then she was hugging me. People at the table were clapping. Denise was pointing at the stage. Someone behind me said, go, Brielle. I stood up and smoothed the front of my dress with both hands because that was something to do besides shake. The walk to the stage felt strange. Not long. Just incredibly clear. Every step was clear. The stairs. The lights. The edge of the podium. The plaque in the presenter's hands. My own heartbeat somewhere up near my throat. And my family, sitting there with nowhere to look but straight at me. When they handed me the award, the presenter smiled and said, congratulations, Brielle. Like my name belonged in that room. I thanked her, stepped to the microphone, and looked out. This part matters, so I want to say it exactly right. I did not decide to embarrass my family. I decided not to protect the version of me they preferred. That's different. I kept my speech short. I thanked the alliance. Thanked my team by name. Thanked the clients who trusted us with the messy middle of building something. Then I said this, a lot of service businesses get overlooked because they don't look flashy from the outside. But being steady, useful, and profitable is its own kind of success. Sometimes the strongest companies are the ones people underestimate because they don't know how much work it takes to build them. I'm proud of what we've built quietly, and I'm even prouder that it helps other people build lives they can count on. That was it. No family references. No hidden knife. No dramatic pause. I didn't need one. The whole room already knew enough. When I stepped off stage, people stopped me before I even got back to the table. A banker asked for my card. A woman from a local magazine wanted to follow up next week. A man who owned 3 HVAC companies said, "My controller's retiring. We should talk." Someone else said, "I had no idea Sutton Ledger was that big." That line almost made me laugh. No idea. Story of my life. By the time I got back to my seat, my phone had 3 new texts. From my mother, "Why didn't you tell us?" From Grant, "We need to talk after this." From my father, "Stay a few minutes when it's over." I didn't answer any of them. I stayed through the final category, did the group photo, and took exactly one picture with Aunt Renee holding the plaque between us. In that photo, I looked calm. I was calm. Not because I didn't care, because something had finally settled. The truth was out in a room they respected. Publicly. Cleanly. Without me having to argue one word of it. At 9:31, the program wrapped and people started drifting toward the lobby and bar area. I knew my family would come. And they did. My mother first, of course. Then my father. Then Grant and Elise half a step behind. Aunt Renee stood up beside me, adjusted her wrap, and said, "I'm going to get some air. Call if you need me." She wasn't abandoning me. She was giving me room. My mother stopped in front of me and said, "Brielle." Just my name. No smile. I stood there with the award tucked against my side and waited. She looked at the plaque, then back at me. "I didn't understand," she said. And that right there was probably the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. Before I could answer, my father spoke. Still controlled. Still smooth. Still trying to get his footing back. "Well," he said, glancing around at the people moving through the lobby, "this is certainly more substantial than we realized." More substantial than we realized. Even then. Even there. He couldn't just say I was successful. He had to phrase it like he'd misjudged a renovation estimate. Grant stepped in next. "Why wouldn't you tell us it had become this?" Become this. Like it had accidentally swelled in the night. I looked at all 3 of them and felt something I wasn't expecting. Not anger. Distance. Just distance. Because even in their shock, they were still centering themselves. "Why didn't you tell us?" "We didn't realize. We didn't understand." Not once. We never asked. And that was when I knew the conversation we were about to have was not going to be the one they thought it was. We were standing in the lobby near a tall arrangement of white orchids and sponsor banners when my father said, "You should have let us support this." That almost got a laugh out of me. Not because it was funny. Because it was such a perfect sentence for him. He could watch me build something for years without asking one real question, then stand in front of it once other people respected it and act like he'd been denied a role. I said, "Support what exactly?" My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. Grant shifted his weight and said, "Brielle, come on. Nobody's saying we handled everything perfectly." Everything. That was another family trick. Take years of small wounds and flatten them into everything, like the scale itself is the overreaction. I looked at him and said, "No. You just handled me exactly the way this family always has." Elise stayed quiet, which honestly was the smartest thing anybody there did. My father lowered his voice. "This isn't the place." I said, "Actually, it kind of is." Not loud. Not sharp. Just true. He glanced around, probably checking who might hear us. That instinct never left him. Image first. Always. My mother tried next. "We worried about you." That's all any of this ever was. I held the plaque a little tighter against my side and said, "No, Mom. You worried about whether my life matched the one you knew how to explain." That landed. Her face changed in the small, tired way I hadn't seen before. Not defensive exactly. More like something in her had finally run out of room. My father said, "You're being unfair." And that was when I stopped trying to make any of it easier. I said, "You offered me a 12-year-old Corolla in front of your friends because you thought I needed help getting back on my feet. You gave Grant money, attention, introductions, and pride. You gave me concern. You talked about Nolan like he was temporary. You talked about my company like it was something to pass time. You never asked how many employees I had. You never asked what we built. You never asked what I'd built. Not once." Nobody interrupted. So I kept going. I helped plan your dinners, your trips, your wedding budgets, your seating charts, your hotel blocks, your contract problems. I saved money for people in this family who still talked about me like I was trying to become an adult instead of already being one. Grant looked down at the floor. My mother said my name quietly, like that might soften it. It didn't. I turned to her and said, "Do you know what hurts the most? It's not that you were cruel. It's that you were polite. Polite enough that I looked difficult if I ever tried to name it." That was the truest thing I said all night. Because open cruelty gives you something to point at. Casual dismissal just settles over your life until one day you realize you've been breathing it for years. My father straightened his jacket and said, "Well, clearly you've made something of yourself." Something of yourself. Even then, he couldn't say he was proud. Couldn't say I was wrong about what happened. Couldn't say he missed it. Just something of yourself. I looked at him and felt nothing I needed from him anymore. That was the biggest surprise of the night. Not winning. Not the applause. Not my family's faces when my name came up on the screen. It was realizing I was done waiting for language they were probably never going to give me. So I said the only thing that actually mattered. "You don't get to discover me now just because other people introduced me correctly." Nobody spoke for a second. Then Grant said, "What do you want from us?" Not "what do you need?" Not "how do we fix it?" "What do you want from us?" A practical question. My family's favorite kind. And because of that, I gave him a practical answer. "I'm not doing family life the old way anymore." My mother blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm done showing up to be underestimated. I'm done being the helpful extra in rooms where my actual life gets talked around. I'm done pretending comments are harmless because they're said with a smile." My father's mouth tightened. "So what, you're punishing everybody now?" I said, "No. I'm changing access." That got his attention. He knew exactly what that meant even if he hated hearing it out loud. I kept my voice calm. I wanted every word to stay clean. "You want a relationship with me, it has to be a real one. That means curiosity before opinions. Respect for Nolan. No more little comments about my work, my house, my money, my choices, or whether I'm settled enough for your standards. No more calling when you need logistics and treating me like an afterthought the rest of the time." My mother looked like she might cry. My father looked like he wanted to end the conversation by force of posture alone. Grant looked embarrassed, which honestly was overdue. Elise finally spoke then, very softly. "She's right." Everybody turned to look at her. She didn't shrink from it either. She said, "She helped us a lot. More than I ever said properly. And we did treat her like she'd always just be there to handle things." That mattered more than I expected. Not because it fixed anything. Because it broke the family pattern for 1 second. Someone actually named it. Grant rubbed a hand over his face and said, "Okay. Fine. Then I'm saying it now. I'm sorry." I looked at him. He looked miserable, but he looked sincere too. Not transformed. Not suddenly perfect. Just sincere. And for that moment, it was enough to hear. I said, "Thank you." My mother asked, "Can we start over?" I remember that question clearly because years earlier I would have grabbed it like a lifeline. That night I didn't. I said, "No. But we can start honestly." That was the line. That was the whole future, really. Not erasing. Not pretending. Not one big emotional reset where everybody cries and hugs and becomes better by dessert. Honestly. My father let out one of those small, irritated breaths he uses when a room stops following his script. I think this has all become a bit theatrical. There it was. His last move. Reduce the truth by calling the reaction dramatic. I looked at him and said, "That's exactly why we're done for tonight." Then I turned to my mother. "If you want to see me, call me yourself. Not for a favor. Not through Grant. Not because there's an event and you need seats. Call because you actually want to know me." She nodded once. I turned to Grant. "You can come by the house sometime. You and I. No audience." He nodded too. Then I looked at my father. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't give a speech. Didn't try to win. I just said, "I'm not available for this version of our relationship anymore." And then I walked away. Clean exit. Aunt Renee was waiting just outside under the overhang with my wrap over her arm like she knew exactly how long it would take. She handed it to me and asked, "How bad?" I put the plaque in the passenger seat of her car and said, "Not bad. Just finished." That was September 26th, 2025. A Friday. Warm night. Clear sky. Traffic thick on Tryon. I drove home later than I meant to, kicked off my heels in the kitchen, and found Nolan still awake at the table eating tortilla chips out of the bag like any civilized husband would. He stood up the second he saw the plaque. "Well," I set it down in front of him. He looked at it, looked at me, and said, "There she is." Then he held me for a long time. I didn't cry at the event. Didn't cry in the lobby. Didn't cry in the car. I cried in my own kitchen with my face pressed into Nolan's t-shirt while the dishwasher hummed and somebody outside revved a motorcycle too hard at the light. Real life. That's where it finally came out. The months after that were quieter than people probably expect. No dramatic family breakup. No giant apology basket at my door. No overnight transformation. Just consequences. Just patterns getting interrupted. My mother called 9 days later. Not a group text. Not a forwarded invite. Not a favor. She called. We met for coffee on October 8th at a place halfway between our houses. She was early. I was later than she liked. For the first 10 minutes, she kept trying to say things around the real thing. "You know your father has a hard time with surprises." I didn't realize how far things had gone. "We always thought you preferred privacy." Then finally, she stopped circling. She put both hands around her cup and said, "I was wrong about your life. And I think I kept you small in my mind because it was easier than admitting I had not been paying attention." That was not a perfect apology, but it was an honest one. So I said, "Thank you for saying it plainly." We started there. Not every week. Not too fast. Just there. She came to the office in November after asking first. That mattered. Asking first. She met Tasha and Miguel and Leah. She saw the whiteboards, the client wall, the break room Nolan had helped paint, the conference table I'd bought secondhand, and then refinished on our back patio one Sunday in socks and an old sweatshirt. She stood in the lobby and said, almost to herself, "I really didn't know." I said, "I know." There was sadness in that moment. Real sadness. Because part of me had wanted this years earlier. Before the buildup. Before the distance hardened into skill. But late isn't the same as never. So I let that be true too. Grant came by the house in November like I said he could. Just him. He brought coffee beans from some overpriced place near his office and stood awkwardly in my kitchen until Nolan rescued him by asking if he wanted to see the garage shelves he'd built. Men really do bond best while looking at screws and plywood. Later, Grant and I sat on the back steps while the smoker warmed up and finally had a conversation with no audience. He admitted he'd benefited from the family system and mostly never questioned it because it worked for him. That was hard to hear. Also fair. He said, "I don't think I understood how often you were being translated instead of known." That sentence stayed with me. Translated instead of known. I told him that was exactly what it felt like. Things with him got better slowly after that. Not magically. Slowly. Elise texted me a proper apology too. Longer than I expected. More self-aware than I would have guessed. She said she'd treated me like built-in labor and didn't question why it felt so natural to ask me for invisible work. I respected that she named it. We're not best friends now, but we're honest, and honestly is more useful. My father was the one who didn't come around. Not really. He called once in October and left a voicemail that was mostly about tone, timing, and family embarrassment. Not much about me. Not much about the actual issue. He said I'd blindsided everyone and made private misunderstandings public. Private misunderstandings. I deleted the voicemail after saving it to a folder first because old habits die hard and I still like records. He texted on Thanksgiving asking if we were coming to dinner. I replied, "Not this year." He sent back, "Your mother was hoping to see you." I wrote, "Then she can come by Saturday at 2 if she'd like." She did. He didn't. That became the shape of things. My mother and I built something smaller and truer. Grant and I rebuilt slowly. Elise found her footing in a more honest version of the family. My father stayed mostly where he'd always been, waiting for everyone else to return to the old arrangement. We didn't. That part matters too. Because not every story ends with everybody growing at the same speed. Some people never do. Some people only miss your worth once other people clap for it. Some people hear your boundaries as punishment because they only liked you in roles that cost you something. Life moved on, and that was the best part. By January 2026, Sutton Ledger had 94 active clients and 7 employees. We crossed $1.14 million in revenue that spring. I gave year-end bonuses that made me prouder than the award did, honestly. Tasha cried. Miguel pretended he had dust in his eye. Leah immediately started planning a team dinner somewhere nice enough to justify eyeliner. Nolan stayed Nolan. Study. Funny. Good in the ways that count. We finally redid the ugly bathroom in February. Total cost was $18,600. Still too much for a room where people mostly brush their teeth and rush out, but it makes me happy every morning, so I'm calling it money well spent. Aunt Renee came over the day after it was finished, sat on the closed toilet lid like she was judging a pageant, and said, "Look at you. Nice house. Nice husband. Nice life. No permission slip in sight." That made me laugh because it was true. That's the thing nobody tells you when you grow up being underestimated. You can spend years thinking the goal is finally getting seen by the people who missed you. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the real win is building a life so solid that their late understanding doesn't get to define it. I wanted my family's approval for a long time. Longer than I'm proud of, probably. But what I actually needed was to stop organizing myself around the lack of it. That changed everything. So if you've ever been the one in the family who handled things quietly while somebody else got the spotlight, I want to say this as plainly as I can. Your value does not go down just because the room doesn't know how to name it. And being overlooked can trick you into hiding your own life even from yourself. Don't do that. Build it. Track it. Protect it. Say it out loud when it deserves to be said. And if the people closest to you only know how to love a smaller version of you, let them deal with the distance that creates. You do not have to keep volunteering for a role that erases you. If this hit home for you, tell me where you're watching from and comment the word unseen if you know what it feels like to be underestimated by your own family. And if you've ever had to rebuild your life on your own terms, I'd really want to hear that too.